Here are 3 tips and tricks that you can use to make more trades in your Dynasty leagues. All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more with the NBA and the NHL playoffs over. The sports stop sporting like we'd like them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk, who you can read at Pro Football Focus and Behind the Steel Curtain. Check her out on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. On today's show, it is part one of a 2-part episode where we're going to talk to you about how to trade better in your Dynasty League, how to make more trades, how to improve your team by trading. And before we even get to some of the tips and tricks, Kate, I just got to say, trading is my favorite part of fantasy football. I think this is why I've become so addicted to it. I think it's why I host a daily podcast about it. I love trading in fantasy leagues.
Trading in fantasy leagues is one of the most fun things, and it's what makes Dynasty fantasy football in particular so fun and interesting, especially here in the offseason. So we know we don't really have much fantasy football news. We still don't have any Brandon Ayuk breaking news. Like, it's kind of a dead time in the offseason, not just for football, but all of sports. But you know how to spice it up. You make some Dynasty trades. So we want to, encourage some trading for our listeners. And obviously, like, we can talk about start sit questions. We can talk about, like, should I accept this trade? But we want to give some actionable, tangible advice to people just to help you become better traders, and not necessarily, give you specific advice about trade targets, but how can we inherently make you a better trader in Dynasty?
And our first tip is probably the most important, and it's to know your league mates. It's really easy for us on this podcast to say, hey, trade this player for this player, but that's all in a vacuum, right? It's your league mates are going to value players differently. They're going to have different goals in mind. They're going to have different ideas on how to build their dynasty team. So it's really important that you know your league mates. And you and I were discussing pre-show. I play in several dynasty leagues with most of the same people. There's like 8 or 9 of the managers that all play in these dynasty leagues. So I actually have a notebook, Kate, where I just jot down every trade that I've ever made. And then on top of that, every trade that's made in these leagues. So you could go back and see what the dynasty managers kind of value when it comes to trading. I think that's the most important because there's some managers in my league. I'm going to give you a couple of examples if you don't mind. I have one friend who routinely values young players over anything else. He wants the 21, 22-year-old receiver over the proven guys all day long because
I'm sending him Devin Achane so fast. It's not even funny.
Like, this guy's holding on to Christian Watson, and he's valuing him as like a top 20 receiver because he saw one game where he had 3 or 4 touchdowns, right? Like, that dynasty manager is going to have no interest in trading for a 31-year-old Devontae Adams, like none. That's important when it comes to managing your trades. I have another one.
Conversely, you also know when you want to unload one of these young players that maybe you don't think is going to pan out, that he's the guy who's probably going to have the most intrigue and the most interest in trading for these players. And he values them probably a little bit more higher than the quote unquote market value. Like, play it both ways.
Yes. And we're going to be talking about draft picks in a second, but I have another friend who just values future draft picks over everything else. He'll sell a current player on his roster for 80 cents on the dollar to grab that extra draft pick. Now, that's helped him win a lot of championships, but you can also maybe steal a player off his roster. I think knowing your league mates is the single most important thing when it comes to making dynasty trades.
I think that's a very fair point, and not just knowing them and their kind of habits, right? But I'm gonna like say this, and this is probably the most basic piece of advice: know their favorite team, because
Yes.
there are times where in like as even in industry drafts where I've been able to offload some players where, maybe, it's their favorite team, or like I example XYZ, I'm a Steelers fan, right? So like
You are?
if you want to unload Najee Harris, I'm probably a great person to do it with, right? Like I'm going to value those players probably a little bit more inherently because of my bias. Conversely, when I'm trading with a Dallas Cowboys fan, it's probably going to take me a little bit more to squeeze CeeDee
Yes.
Lamb from your grip. So like it plays both ways, but knowing what their favorite team is, if you have players on those teams, you can kind of leverage those in those situations. And then also, which players are probably going to cost you above market value. And for example, if I'm in a league with myself, and I have Zach Moss, who I know I've made plenty of splash about in the past few years. Like, if I'm my league mate, I'm probably going to know that Kate Majuk is going to overpay for Zach Moss, and I'm going to be sending some offers that are not overly
Yep.
generous to my side of the equation because of my inherent bias towards this player. Know your league mates' inherent biases, whether that be a preference for, what type of players you're acquiring, whether it be, whether they value age or draft picks or
Mhm.
favorite team or some of their favorite players. Like, get to know those things about your league mates. And it's going to help you gauge the market in a very valuable way that, you know, these dynasty trade calculators, etc., aren't able to do.
You mentioned the favorite team one, and that's really good advice. I'm gonna go even a little bit further. I
So big,
have
but like, you know,
well, no, you're right. I have I play in a dynasty league with a manager who is a Broncos fan. I would say like a casual fan, but he is a huge Penn State fan. You look at his dynasty rosters and they're loaded with Penn State players, right? Now, that's not an accident, right? Like he's actively drafting these Penn State players higher or trading for them because he wants players that were on his favorite team and he wants to watch them in the NFL. And I think that's the other thing. There's a couple of my managers in my leagues who maybe are more casual NFL fans, but they want to draft and acquire players that they like to watch on Sundays. Maybe not the guys like I'm picking on Keenan Allen who are a little bit boring, but they want the fun, exciting players that get you really excited. If you can kind of remember that going into trades, I think you'll have more success.
I love that. And again, this is so kind of surface level, but having that kind of mentality when you're trading can open up a realm of possibilities and a realm of value that maybe you haven't yet found in your league's trade market.
The last thing I want to say about this one before we move on is don't be the guy in your league that tries, or guy or girl in your league that tries to always lowball everybody, because your reputation as a trader, right, matters, right? Because if they see an offer from Marcus Mosher, they know that I'm always trying to lowball them. They're automatically going to have a negative feeling regarding that trade, even if it's a fair trade offer. So,
I'm sorry, we have that person. Every league
yes,
has that one dude
you don't want to be
or
that person.
gal who sends an offer. And as soon as you see the alert on your phone,
You know it's a bad trade.
you're about to be in for a giggle. Like I'm gonna get a laugh. Like there's always that one manager. But I do think that, there comes a point when, we all kind of overvalue the players that we get to like, and we'll tend to overvalue players that maybe have been on our roster for some time and that we're excited for heading into the season. But if you as a manager are making lowball offers and that's the perception of you among your league mates,
Mhm.
nobody's going to be excited to trade with you because they don't feel like you're in it in good faith. And that's not the way to build relationships with fellow dynasty managers. And that's definitely not the way to get a nice, active
Mhm.
trading league in the books.
There's some really good tools out there, including Dynasty Trade Calculator, that will help you. They'll serve as a guideline for whether a trade is fair or not fair. Don't go, they're not the Bible, but use those to avoid the low ball offers, and I think you'll be okay. Okay, let's talk about draft picks when it comes to trading. Should you be giving them away like candy, or should you hoard them like a miser? We will get to that next. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. It is really easy to jump on social media and start comparing your lives to others. I know everybody's life on Instagram and on Facebook looks so much better than ours, but comparison is a thief of joy, and it is so easy to do it in today's social media world. It might look like they have everything together on their Instagram, on their TikTok, on their Facebook page, but in reality, they probably don't. But therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have so that you can start living your best life. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It is done entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for any reason at no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked on. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that unnecessary screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, we are back in part one of our two-part series and trying to make you a better dynasty trader. Okay, let's talk about draft picks. How do you feel about trading draft picks in dynasty leagues?
It's kind of the beauty and the beast in Dynasty because obviously you are looking for this goal and you are trying to balance this ever changing and ever evolving roster of, a contending roster versus a rebuilding roster. I think the first point that you have to make is kind of understanding where you're at in your dynasty build. We talk about this all the time. Being aware of whether or not you are truly a contending top 3 roster in your dynasty league versus having the understanding that this isn't going to be a championship season and making a decision and leveraging your position there regardless of which one it is. That's going to decide your overall outlook for picks and your willingness to trade them. Now, if you are a contender, I'm a little bit more willing to shell out picks for high-end producers. But if I'm not a contender, Marcus, I'm not sending a first round pick unless things are really going to be tipping the scales in my favor.
And I have a hard time even doing that because you just never know when it comes to a first round pick. You might think that you are the favorite to win your championship or you're in the top 2, and all of a sudden you have an injury and that pick that was supposed to be pick 11 or 12 is now suddenly 7 or 8. And that can be a big difference. That can be the difference between drafting Keon Coleman or Roma Dunze, right? That's a pretty big difference. So I am very hesitant to trade away a first round pick unless I'm getting back a bona fide contributor right away. What I basically mean is
A
I don't want
perennial
you're
contributor.
right. I don't want to do the trades if I can get away with it where I'm trading X player and a first round pick for another player because I want to have as many avenues as possible for a trade to work out. And this is something that Matt Williamson has taught me over the years is when you're trading multiple assets for one player, you better be right on that one player because more often than not, one of the other 2 or 3 or 4 assets is going to end up becoming as valuable as the player that you acquired. So be very judicious when it comes to trading away high draft picks.
Can I tell you my worst trading story of
Of course,
all
I'd love to
time?
hear it.
This is the worst trade I've ever made in my entire life. It was in my very first dynasty league back in the day. And I traded my first round pick for Doug Martin on a roster where I thought I was contending. I was riddled with injuries. Doug Martin did not pan out that season. And I was left with the 101, or what would have been my 101 in the year to follow. Guess who was the 101? Saquon Barkley. I missed out on Saquon Barkley because I decided it would be worthwhile to trade for a 1-year loaner in Doug Martin. And it didn't even end up being that. I missed out on a perennial RB1 because I was willing to give away that first round pick. And that did not work in my favor, obviously. Like, I think that's one of the best examples I could probably give of, one of these situations where it panned out so terribly. Not every situation is going to pan out in that direction. But think about even this year, right? In the 2024 season, there weren't a ton of, top end running backs in this draft. There were a lot of really talented wide receivers. So if you were in a super flex, you probably were able to draft Jonathan Brooks with one of the final picks of the first round. Yep. He is the clear-cut RB1 in this class right now, being drafted as a top 12 running back in Dynasty. And you were able to snag him at the end of the first. So even if you were a contending roster last year, you were probably in play for Jonathan Brooks. So like, with that, not every draft class is totally different, but the range of outcomes for rookie picks is so big and so wide. But especially those first rounders, they have the highest hit rate of any round, rookie pick that you're going to look at in Dynasty. So trading away those assets, you better be certain that this is going to be a player that's not just going to contribute for this year, but the next year and hopefully the year after that.
The last thing I want to say about draft picks is it's really funny to try to figure out how valuable a draft pick is, because when you're in the season, draft picks aren't worth as much as they are after the year, right? Like once we get to January and February, that's when the draft picks start to become more valuable, right?
Once the draft picks start to have kind of faces, once we start to have prospects that we can theoretically slot into those spots, they become so much more valuable.
But what's interesting is that once the draft starts happening, the picks actually go down in value, right? Because now, instead of all of these names that you could potentially draft, Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, you only get one of those guys, right? So it is interesting how the value changes in a first round pick. But generally, the idea is you want to always, at least in my opinion, you want to always try to keep your first round pick and then add others if you can. You and I were talking pre-show. One of your strategies, and I don't want to steal your segment, is to always try to slip in a late round pick into your trades. Can you explain that thought process?
Absolutely. Every time I do a trade, and this is kind of my signature line. I hope people in my Dynasty leagues aren't listening here, but my signature line is throw in a third and you've got a deal. Throw in a fourth and you've got a deal. And I'm going to be honest, most of my Dynasty rosters, by the time the rookie drafts come around, I have so many third round picks, fourth round picks that I'm able to then package and move up for higher draft capital. Like one league, I had, I think, 5 third round picks that I had just accumulated because my tagline for every trade was throw in a third and you've got a deal. Like it never hurts to ask. And even if it's a fourth round pick, you're still, you're gaining dart throws, right?
Yes.
And that's one of my favorite strategies because, there are people that if there's a deal they're itching to get done, a third round pick, a fourth round pick, they feel so much less significant than those first and second round picks. But you acquire enough of them and you might push yourself up into the first round. You might push yourself up into the second round with all that accumulated draft capital. And I just think it's like a very low key, sneaky way to accumulate a bunch of picks without your league mates necessarily taking notice.
Last thing before we move on, one of the sneaky things that I like to do is, let's say I'm drafting at 203, right? Or 202. And there's somebody that fell. Maybe it's a receiver or a running back. Hey, give me your first round pick and I'll give you this pick and a fourth round pick, right? And if you continue to do that at least once a year, hey, this is pick 301. You give me your next year's second round pick and I'll give you this one. If you can kind of continue to do that, you're always going to be moving up in value Now you have to be patient a little bit. This is going to pay off over the course of 5 or 6 years, but that is generally a pretty good strategy if you just want to gain expected value year in and year out. All right, Kate, let's talk about whether or not you should try to win every trade. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Listen, I love sports. There's nothing more than I love after a long day sitting on the couch, turning on my TV and seeing what sports games are on. It's the absolute best. But unfortunately, with the playoffs winding down, we just have fewer and fewer games to watch. And the sports aren't sporting the way we'd like them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. On tomorrow's show, Matt Williamson is going to join us to finish up part 2 of our trade series. We're going to talk about vetoes, how to actually go after the player that you want, and so much more. So make sure you guys tune in for that. But Kate, let's talk about trying to win a trade. I think there is, and I know I'm guilty of this sometimes, there's a desire to try to win every trade versus to try to actually make your team better. How do we accomplish that?
Every time there's a trade negotiation on, I think there's a little bit of a tendency to, understandably check your resources, look at the player values, look at some recent trades on Dynasty League football, check those trade value charts, the calculators. But I think what some managers do is put so much stock in them in trying to win the trade via their trade calculator, via their trade chart valuation, when
Try to impress their friends. Hey, look at the deal I just pulled off, right?
well, yeah, and you know what, Marcus? Like, the whole goal of a trade is to make your team better. At the end of the day, the trade calculator values do not matter, because there are some trades that, like, I'm going to admit I've done that maybe don't make as much sense when you look at the trade calculators. But if they make my team exponentially better and it fits into the long-term plan that I have for this dynasty roster, whether that is to contend this year, whether that is to rebuild, even the player values, like, kind of subjective depending on like where you're at
Absolutely.
in your build. So like, it's not Bible, as we talked, even in segment 1, knowing your league mates and knowing how they value players and from different teams, or whether they have favorites. Like, trade calculators can't account for all of those circumstances. So throw the trade calculators out the window after you've gotten just a vague idea that you're not getting swindled, and make your team better and leave the trade with a better roster than you had, or a in a better position for a rebuild than it was before. But like, that should be your ultimate goal.
Some of the worst trades that I've ever made are ones where I thought I was gaining a lot of value because of the trade calculator. I was selling an asset that I really liked for 3 pieces that were all good, right? But none of the 3, maybe you got on my dollar asset, I got, $1.25 in nickels, right? And then I get to the games on Sunday, and it's, hey, I only have roster spots to start 2 of these 4 guys that I acquired. Is my team really better off than just keeping the one asset that I had? Probably not. So I understand the idea of trying to win every trade, but try to make the trades that make sense for your team. Try to get the players that, frankly, you want to root for. This is another piece of advice. If I have a guy that I really like, but hey, the trade calculator says that I should trade him for these 3 players that I don't like as much, but the value is there, you're usually better off just holding on to the player that you like because you believe he's in a good situation. You think he's going to produce eventually. Just something to keep in mind when you're making these trades.
Yeah, at the end of the day, this is a fun game. It is meant to be fun. It is fantasy football. Look, there are NFL GMs and head coaches that do not sleep at night because they are in shambles trying to get their rosters together. we don't want that kind of stress, right? We want to have fun. This is a fun process. This is a game. And a part of that is also rooting for players that you like. I don't want to, I will be honest. I think I've rostered Joe Mixon in maybe 2 of my fantasy football leagues ever. And a big part of that is because I don't like him. He's not efficient. Like he's just a
He
player
plays in the
that
Bengals. You're a Steeler fan,
plays for
right?
Bengals. Yeah, like I just don't. I don't want him on my roster because I'm not going to root for him, even though, yeah, he's going to get 250 plus carries. But I also trust my evaluation of the player that he's not efficient. He's got a ton of volume on him. Like, yeah, is he in a good situation here in Texas? Absolutely. But is that going to be a long-term solution that's going to help me in my
No.
long-term goals for my roster? Probably not. But like, again, if it's not a player that you're going to have fun rooting for on Sundays, then this all really doesn't mean all that much.
The last thing I want to say is don't let your ego get in the way of a trade that actually makes your team better, right? If you feel like, hey, I know I'm giving up a little bit more value and I don't want to lose this trade to this league mate of mine, so I'm not going to do it, but I know that it's going to help me. Those can sometimes be the trades that you ultimately come back to regret not doing. So don't let your ego get in the way of making a trade that makes sense for your team.
I love that. I hope we've given everybody some really interesting, at least thought points, right? Of, how to approach this from a long-term standpoint, because, you're not going to win a trade overnight, right? You're
No.
going to probably, especially if there are draft picks involved. I mean, you don't know if you've won a trade for, I'm going to say, about 3 years.
Yeah.
Like there, you don't necessarily have that perspective of winning a trade. So
I can tell you when I lose trades, though. Some of those happen real fast, Kate.
Oh, I found out within the year that I lost my trade for Doug Martin, but that's not every case. Most trades take a little bit longer to actually pan out and figure out where you stand with that. So like, losing your quote unquote losing your trade, it's really hogwash until it
Yes.
plays out in the seasons to come. So just trade in good faith, make your roster perceivably better, and have fun.
All right. Again, everyday listeners, on tomorrow's show, we're going to have Matt Williamson, who's probably made more dynasty trades than anybody in the history of Dynasty League football. So make sure you tune in for that. He's going to have some great advice when it comes to making trades in Dynasty Leagues. You can go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Check out the YouTube channel as well. Go follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. You can read her at Pro Football Focus and Behind the Steel Curtain. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.